I love listening to the stories of old, especially those that have been recorded in history. There's always a charm in learning from what happened in the past. Even better if it's a tale passed down from the forefathers of a friend, or if it was from a scholar trying to recall details from his research. What I don't love is when the speaker drags on and on in their drunken stupor, or when a disgruntled troubadour tries to come up with half-assed rhymes to impress me. But when it is told by a trustworthy source, and when I can see how passionate the speaker is when they retell the tale, I revel in their energy and take their stories to heart. And that was what drew me to this one storyteller I encountered. Whether it was by coincidence or fate, I'm glad to have met her. Of all the friends I've made so far, she was the only person I was confident in sharing all my stories with. And whenever we needed to solve a mystery, I could always rely on her genius. I was nearly 14 when I arrived in Black Wolf Hall. The one thing I held most dear was my well-being. Anything else other than that was insignificant to my cause. But surprisingly, my oblivious, half-insensible way of reasoning changed over time. I met someone special in my class who opened my heart to things I had never experienced before. It was like a new chapter in my life, since back in the days in my remote village, I was an unfriendly loner with an uncertain temper. I shut my ears to any advice that was thrown at my face, and displayed an indifferent attitude toward the people around me. I spent many childhood years longing for absolute strength. I spent those years seeking a powerful weapon, consequences be damned. But now, I questioned my existence and the actions I'd done in the past. So when knowledge stood tall before me, I would bow down willingly and listen to it with an open mind. In my new school, I learned that I missed many things my peers experienced while growing up. The kids back home only knew how to taunt and call me repulsive names. The jeers from them made me cry to my parents when they were still alive. When they passed, I forced myself to get stronger and block out their jests. I started taking lessons from my master, whose verbal assaults and pranks strengthened me at the cost of limiting my free time to walk around the village. Besides, even if I turned back now, no one was there to welcome me. If anything, the greeting they would give me would be one with flaming torches and pitchforks. Well, if only the people in my village knew that unlike their spoiled and overbearing kids, my attitude had drastically changed since I left my home. But perhaps even more astonishing, I had turned into a completely new person with a positive mindset. For whatever reasons that compelled the old egoistic me to make the switch, I believe there was only one motive. I wanted to impress someone special in my class, a person who I thought had somewhat similar circumstances to mine. It was during my school weekend break when I first met the storyteller. She was a young witch who happened to join me in lounging the rest of the warm day away. When I asked her a question about a mysterious object, she explained it with a tale about 7 beings that descended from a nameless star and how they resided in the land. In hindsight, what she related to me was another version of the Chronicle of the Immortals. It was a tale my master, or perhaps my father, told me about when I was but a young child. It was a campy story meant to entertain children, but I couldn't help but burst into a small chuckle when she told it with such fervor. I found the idea of other beings existing beyond this world was nothing but an absurd concept, but as much as I wanted to interrupt her story and tell her my view, I let her keep talking. I did not want to sour her mood, especially not when I saw the glint in her eyes while she was retelling the story. When she was finished, I shared my insights about her tale. I chose my words carefully, and to my surprise, she took the criticisms quite gracefully. She and I talked until the afternoon heat exhausted us of words. The story began over 1,000 years ago, when 7 shooting stars lit up the sky on a hot summer night. Nobody knew why the flaming rocks fell onto our land. Only when the 7 broke the ground did the earth shake under us, and we dreaded what they might do next. Was it a punishment from the gods? It could be, cursing us from their spiritual realm for not bowing down and worshipping them. Even if it's true, I'm sure many of us would still ignore the warning. Since the beginning of life in Earthenia, the 7 races of men have not once knelt to any heavenly gods. What we knew and understood was that the elusive Roran respected the trees. The mighty Kenzorian, or the barbarians' men, adored their axes. The astute Wayland's wizards celebrated their magic, while we, the proud Ares, honored their fallen heroes. The other 3 races' beliefs were mysteries, and had some mixed opinions open to interpretation. In my view, I was convinced they revered things that were significant to them, just like we did. In fact, throughout our long history, we never knew of our origin and questioned our existence. Not until 7 years later, after the meteors fell from the sky. Most of the races finally admitted there were other beings much stronger than them, and they called these powerful gods Immortals. The first one to rise in our land was from the barbarians' men, the mighty Relgar of the Kenzorian race. Legend had it that an immortal touched the ambitious Relgar when he was in his prime, and then he became stronger, the mightiest among the Khans. Within 5 years, he united all the wild Kenzorian tribes in the Yellow Plains, a rugged region in the south of the continent. Hence, with the power of the gods and the authority of the conquerors blessing him, Relgar and his barbarian hordes invaded the dark forest, and the peaceful land of Earthenia plunged into chaos. For thousands of years, the Roran people, or in our tongue, the Huns, had ruled the dark forest land. They believed their ancestors were mythical forest dwellers that migrated from the desert wilderness much further south of the Yellow Plains. For many generations, they had successfully quelled the barbarians' incursion into their kingdom. The invading numbers back then were in the hundreds, groups all wanting a share of the rich bounty the forest land provided. The Huns, however, never expected that Relgar brought 50,000 ravenous Khans with him, and every single one of them impatiently seething, hungry for the taste of blood. The Huns were devastated by the strength of their sworn enemies' invading force. Further eating away their morale was the sudden death of their old king, Alemur. The Huns were in the dark for hours, unwilling to defend their positions. Some even gave up arms and ran away, letting the Khans claim most areas in the dark forest for themselves. But the situation changed when the heir to the throne, Elrondel, turned out to be one of the Immortals. In his first battle on the front lines against Relgar, he displayed his supernatural strength and superior command. Over the following months, the steel-pointed arrows and swords of the Huns clashed against the broad axes and the tenacity of the Khans. Elrondel and his people pushed the invaders back to neutral territory. In their wake were scores of burning villages and thousands of murdered bystanders. Rural villages dried up, and those living near the battlefield succumbed to the war and famine. The advantage did not last long, however, and soon enough, the seemingly unstoppable Khan's forces marched on toward Hynera, the capital city of the Huns. The Huns lost morale once more, and during the siege of the city, many more soldiers gave up the cause. Until an Ares knight appeared in the nick of time. He stood out like a beacon of strength to the Huns, and arrived at the battlefield as if he was a meteor, striking down a large wave of Huns in a single move. There were many heroic tales written about Valiant Black during the time of the Great War. While the drunk Ares soldiers sang his songs on summer nights in lowly crowded taverns, the Huns wrote down his glorious feats in sacred books, and held them in high esteem among their people. The night was dark when the stars were born from a little spark. The sky was torn. The forest was young and the mountains were old when the 7 gods fell and the land turned cold. The valiant knight rode and the valiant knight flew, slew the savage horde with his ghostly crew. The valiant knight rode and the valiant knight flew, slew the savage horde with his ghostly crew. The world's at peace when the Khans broke through, when the Huns' light faded to a darker hue. When hope seemed lost in the hour of doom, on the mighty Black and his star-crossed groom. The valiant knight rode and the valiant knight flew, slew the savage horde with his ghostly crew. I swore there were more verses in the song the boost-up soldiers bawled in the tavern back at my village. Alas, my master caught me hiding in one of the empty wine barrels, and then pulled my prying ear before I could finish listening to all of it. With Valiant's help, the Huns resisted Relgar's advancement. They used tactics such as cutting the Khan supply lines from the Yellow Plains to the Dark Forest, and laid ambushes instead of engaging them in an open battle. A year without a clear victory over the Huns, Relgar became impatient and approached the Fire Lord of the Demon Zor race, Hilaria Demons, with an offer. A proposal to split Earthenia between their 2 strong nations. Much to the dismay of the Huns, the Lord of Fire with his fiery legion accepted the unholy deal. We had a vague description of the Demon Zor race. Our books depicted them to have similar features to ours, except for their reddish skin and red-colored eyes. The beautiful red mountains in the northeastern part of Earthenia used to be their ancestral homeland, and the historical records about their race could no longer be readily available. They supposedly had been extinct for the past 1,000 years. The Demon Zor's beliefs were another thing that puzzled the scholars. They boldly asserted their Fire Lord as another of the Immortals, and yet no evidence points to that. No one knew how he became an immortal, and no one knew how he used his powers as one. Even if our scholars consulted the Huns who had records of the battle, the information they had were only vague descriptions and general mentions of his supernatural power. Furthermore, my friend added that when a Demon Zor became angry, their skin would glow bright red, as if I would easily agree with her theory, since she got it from her uncle's books and out witnessing it herself. One thing about what I'd learned back home, it would take more than smart and pretty words to influence me in something which sounded silly, particularly if it came from someone whom I was just acquainted with. Unless I saw the physical transformation with my own eyes, this statement was nothing more than hearsay. Still, after I put much thought into it, I saw no harm could come from doubting her words. Although our group members had only recently met, we soon felt like good friends. She was 10 times smarter than I was, and she didn't seem to be like my old master, the King of Lies, one of the few nicknames I'd given him. When Relgar and Hilaria combined their forces, they defeated the Huns, and King Elrondel died when High Nora fell unopposed. Valiant, with his remaining strength, safely guided the leaderless Huns to Greenshire, the land of the Ares and Wayland's people to the northwest of Earthenia. Following Valiant's appointment as the first Ares king, he rallied the other races to unite and form an alliance of their own. Unfortunately, the tough half-orcs men resented the Ares and refused to fight alongside them. They did, however, provide war machines to the Alliance's cause due to their close relationship with Valiant. The violet-eyed Vozat, on the other hand, first agreed to help, but when the time came for the final battle, they broke their promise. After the war ended, Valiant branded them as traitors, and they had been living in the shadows ever since. The final battle of the Immortals' War took place on the eastern fields in Greenshire, and it was known now as the Battle of the Scorching Plains. Valiant led the Fresh Alliance's troops, which comprised 15,000 Ares soldiers, 10,000 Hans fighters, and 2,000 Wayland wizards, while Relgar and Hilaria had a joint force of 70,000 battle-hardened warriors. Anyone who witnessed this standoff from the sideline would bet their lives that the strong legion of Relgar and Hilaria would wipe out the Lesser Alliance army. But it turned out to be the smallest group of men who took part in the battle that won the day. The violent battle lasted for hours, with both sides showing no signs of surrendering. Relgar and Hilaria's forces were like a tidal wave, but the Alliance was like a cliff by the ocean. The Alliance prevailed despite their heavy disadvantage. In preparation for battle, Valiant ordered his soldiers to build 20-foot-high mobile towers to supplement the half-orcs war machines they were given. The Waylands were placed on top so they may cast their spells at a safe distance. The Huns and Ares dragged the towers with their burdened beasts toward their enemy's strategic positions. They rained down fire, lightning, and ice on Relgar and Hilaria's warriors. Having no prior experience in fighting magic casters, the invading forces were soundly defeated. Soon after the battle in the Eastern Plain ended, the Huns hunted down Relgar. Our history book stated that the mighty Khan died during the persistent pursuit. As for the Demon Zor army, they were left with a handful of warriors, including the distraught Hilaria. They scattered back to their homeland in the Red Mountains, with the Ares hot on their heels. Then, in the Eastern Land, the Fire Lord vanished without a trace, presumably killed during the climactic chase. The Huns took back their beloved city, and the victorious Ares made the Red Mountains part of their northern kingdom. The great King Valiant had finally restored peace and order in the land of Ruthenia after 3 years of war. It was a beautiful tale, but I had a lot of questions. Why did the half-orcs despise our kind? My friend unfortunately did not know, and our historical accounts did not help either. A lot of half-orcs records have been removed from books too. The only thing she knew about it was because of a blood feud between them and us, but even that was a vague answer. And what about the Vozats? What made them turn away from the Alliance? How did the Demon Zor become extinct? She had no answers to my questions, and it still puzzled me. My friend concluded her story by saying that King Valiant's legend ended when he disappeared a year after the Immortals' War. Great monuments were erected to honor the great king, and until now, many look up to him as a role model and outstanding figure. But after my friends and I parted our ways, a sudden thought drifted through my head, telling me that the Immortals' tale didn't end when King Valiant went missing. 1,000 years after the Black King's monarchy had stayed strong and unrivaled in Ruthenia, an assassin murdered Valiant's last heir, thus ending the Black King's bloodline. I feared the event might have a connection with me traveling out of my infamous village and far away from constant danger, and that it had somehow brought me to Black Wolf Hall, a school of knighthood, wizardry, and ranger.